Imagine, if you will, Vienna in the year 1793. The air within the opulent confines of the imperial palace is thick with the fragrance of incense and the palpable tension of anticipation. Behind closed doors, the tumult of labor begins to recede, giving way to the first cries of a newborn. The court collectively exhales, feeling a momentary relief as they welcome an emperor into the world. But this triumph is fleeting, almost overshadowed by an unsettling reality. The infant quivers with each breath. His skull is uneven beneath the delicate embroidery of his cap, bulging in places where the bones have failed to fuse. As seconds drag on, courtiers exchange nervous glances. All eyes are on the child, who does not emit a single cry. When his eyes finally open, they linger unfocused, staring into nothingness. The empress, pale and frozen in place, stares in horror at the tiny life she has brought into being. What was meant to secure the future of the dynasty instead signals its impending decline. In him, the hopes and ambitions of centuries converge, only to reveal a genetic collapse. An empire that once dominated half of Europe has produced an heir incapable of even managing his own heartbeat. Physicians of the time would label this condition as nervous weakness, while priests would insist it was a divine trial. History, however, would ultimately reveal it as what it truly was, the unraveling of an empire consuming itself from within. Long before his seizures would shake thrones and his speech dissolved into fragmented prayers, before officials learned to hide their emperor from his own people, Ferdinand of Austria was heralded as the future of a dynasty already crumbling beneath its own luxurious facade. This is the documented account of the consequences when human arrogance turns incest into state policy. Geneticists in modern times would soon discover what had been hidden within this family's DNA: unthinkable mutations that had compounded with each generation until nature itself broke. To set the stage, let us go back to April 19, 1793, when Archduchess Maria Theresa of Naples and Sicily went into labor. The court physicians stood prepared with silver instruments and murmured prayers as they awaited the arrival of the infant. When the child finally emerged, an air of unease enveloped the room even before he had uttered his first cry. His skull was abnormally shaped, his skin a waxy pale, and his limbs trembled as if touched by an invisible current. Upon gazing down at her newborn, the empress fell silent, terror gripping her heart. Ferdinand's mother was acutely aware of the curse of consanguinity that had shadowed her family for generations. She was not only a niece but also a cousin to her own husband, Emperor Francis II. The child she cradled was both her son and the living embodiment of centuries of genetic repetition. The Habsburg family tree had long ceased to branch out. Instead, it had curled back upon itself, much like a serpent consuming its own tail. For over 200 years, Happy Austria had been more than just a motto. Cousins married cousins, uncles wed their nieces, and bloodlines folded in upon themselves repeatedly. They defined this practice as dynastic prudence, while science would later call it genetic collapse. Modern analysis of the Habsburg genome indicates that by the late 18th century, their inbreeding coefficient approached a perilous threshold reminiscent of the Spanish branch of the family, hovering around 0.2, far beyond what nature is able to endure. Ferdinand's body bore the heavy cost of this lineage. Royal physicians documented prolonged seizures during his infancy. His cranial sutures fused too early, causing his head to bulge peculiarly at the temples. His lips and tongue failed to coordinate properly, leading milk to dribble uncontrollably from the corners of his mouth. Nurses noted that he would often stare at the ceiling frescoes for extended periods without blinking, only to convulse so violently that the cradle shook. They referred to these episodes as holy attacks, a term reflecting the apex superstition. In an age devoid of neurology, epilepsy was spoken of as a sign of possession, prompting priests to sprinkle holy water and doctors to prescribe remedies of mercury and leeches. Yet nothing worked. The imperial nursery filled with the acrid scent of burnt feathers and sulfur. Folk remedies devised to scare off the devil that supposedly resided within the infant. But if a malevolent force existed, it lay in his very chromosomes. By age 4, Ferdinand remained unable to walk steadily. His legs bowed under his small frame. his feet turning inward as he was carried from chamber to chamber by his tutors, much like Charles II of Spain before him. The resemblance was startling. Both boys served as living warnings of the dangers posed by an overly insular bloodline. Whenever he attempted to speak, words emerged fractured as if his tongue were weighed down. Court records mention a peculiar lisp and constant drooling. The imperial painters softened his portraits, portraying a composed prince with intelligent eyes, while the reality was that he could barely formulate a sentence without assistance. His nurses learned to interpret his mumbles as one might decipher an infant's cries. The court physicians described him as possessing a fragile nervous constitution. He tired easily, slept erratically, and suffered from fevers without discernible cause. When he smiled, it was more a twitch than an expression, a blend of involuntary reaction and pitiable circumstance. The boy destined to rule an empire was trapped within a body that resisted its own commands. Yet remarkably, outside the palace walls, the empire thrived. Emperor Francis II faced revolutions and reshaped Europe, even crowning himself Emperor of Austria in the wake of Napoleon's rise. Inside, however, the heir to that empire trembled at the mere sound of thunder. Ferdinand's education was largely a facade. Latin tutors, piano instructors, and fencing masters orchestrated elaborate performances to convince visiting dignitaries that the Archduke was merely delicate rather than defective. Behind closed doors, the truth was devastating. Ferdinand's handwriting was illegible. He struggled with basic arithmetic, forgot the names of his tutors, and lost track of the days. In moments of frustration, he would bang his head against marble walls until attendants restrained him, a behavior the doctors classified as nervous excitations. Today, we would recognize them as seizures coupled with postictal confusion. As he reached adolescence, Ferdinand's physical deformities intensified. His head remained disproportionately large, with a slight protrusion of his lower jaw, a pale reflection of the infamous Habsburg jaw. His upper and lower teeth never quite met, making eating a laborious process. He often swallowed food half-chewed, and the court chefs compensated by softening meats in broth and soaking bread in wine. During banquets, attendants discreetly wiped the saliva that gathered at his chin. The royal family dined on porcelain. The future emperor consumed mush. At 15, medical records indicated a stunted growth. His height arrested at barely 1.55 meters. His shoulders narrowed, limbs thinned, and his skin appeared almost translucent. Despite reaching puberty, no changes occurred, his voice never deepened, and his body retained a childlike quality. In private, physicians suspected endocrine failure, or what modern geneticists would later identify as a collapsed pituitary system characteristic of inbred royals. Yet their findings remained confidential. Scandal was deemed a greater threat than illness. In their desperation to maintain the image of continuity, the imperial family began planning Ferdinand's marriage. They needed heirs, symbols of strength, and a reassuring message that their bloodline remained viable. However, even the emperor hesitated. How could one marry a boy barely capable of standing, whose mind ebbed and flowed in coherence? Yet tradition and power demanded action. At age 19, Ferdinand suffered his first grand mal seizure in public during Mass at the Hofburg Chapel. He stiffened, his eyes rolling back as limbs thrashed violently while horrified nobles looked on. When he regained consciousness, his first utterance was an apology to God for interrupting the sermon. This spectacle cemented his reputation as fragile, almost saintly, the sickly archduke who endured the suffering for the sins of his house. However, behind this pious facade lay sheer neurological chaos. At 20, it became evident that Ferdinand's intellect would never mature. He could memorize prayers but struggled with state documents. He could mimic proper etiquette but failed to grasp policies. Ministers quietly began managing the empire, preparing for a time when he would act merely as a figurehead. The question was not if he could reign, but rather how long the illusion of capability could be maintained. Thus, the palace adorned with chandeliers and shrouded in gilt transformed into a gilded asylum. Ferdinand surrounded himself with attendants, doctors, and priests who whispered constant reassurances. Outside, the world underwent profound changes. Revolutions brewed. Ideologies clashed. Inside, time stood still for a prince confined to the vestiges of childhood. The empire's greatest secret was not buried in vaults or archives. It sat at its own dinner table, the future emperor of Austria, a living testament to genetic decay. At 22, Ferdinand was proclaimed heir apparent to the Austrian Empire. Courtiers rejoiced, cannons thundered, and the bells of Vienna rang out as if to celebrate a grand victory. Yet behind the sound of this triumph, physicians exchanged apprehensive glances. The heir's hands trembled incessantly, his eyes blinked out of rhythm, and during ceremonies he would freeze mid-gesture, caught between thought and seizure, necessitating gentle guidance from aides. Much like marionettes whose strings have gone slack. The Habsburgs labeled this state devotion, while physicians referred to it as epilepsy. His episodes varied in severity, ranging from mild to catastrophic. They left him pale, disoriented, and prone to biting his own tongue. In moments of clarity, Ferdinand would weep, questioning whether God was punishing him for sins veiled in obscurity. It was easier for him to accept divine wrath than confront the harsh truth of his biology. When his father passed away in 1835, Ferdinand ascended the throne as Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary, and King of Bohemia, titles that meant little to the body that bore them. The empire concealed its frailties behind protocols. Every royal edict required the signature of Metternich, a cunning statesman who effectively became the empire's mastermind. Ferdinand's reign unfolded like a puppet show performed by one who could scarcely hold the quill meant for signing. During the coronation itself, tragedy loomed. As he was anointed, Ferdinand suffered a minor seizure, collapsing against the altar. The archbishop pretended it was a gesture of humility and continued the rites while attendants furtively studied the convulsing monarch. Later paintings would depict him kneeling in pious submission, but the reality was far less holy. The emperor's nervous system had simply shut down. Despite the circumstances, the empire insisted on maintaining appearances. The newly crowned emperor was promptly married to Princess Maria Anna of Savoy, the sister of the King of Sardinia, selected for her docile temperament and robust health. The wedding in Vienna shimmered with gold and crystal chandeliers. Still, observers who glimpsed the couple up close felt a sense of unease. Maria Anna, at 27, exuded beauty and composure beside a trembling man whose lips quivered even at rest, his head tilted forward as if it were too heavy for his slender neck. His voice emerged thin and halting. When commanded by the priest to recite his vows, Ferdinand stumbled through each line, repeating himself multiple times, earning soft chuckles from the audience who believed it was simply nerves. Only his physicians understood that it was a malfunction of his nervous system. The wedding night became the subject of hushed whispers for years. Servants spoke of groans followed by silence and then the sound of quiet sobbing. Discreet consultations were held with physicians the following morning. The verdict, though never formally recorded, was one of impotence. Ferdinand, like many of his Spanish forebears, found himself physically incapable. Whether due to impotence, physical deformities, or sheer mental confusion, the outcome remained the same. No heir would be born of this union. The palace responded with the same ritual denial that had sustained the dynasty for centuries. Holy relics were brought to the emperor's chamber, and he slept with a rosary tightly grasped in one hand while his wife wept silently beside him. Exorcists whispered prayers over his bed during seizures, sprinkling holy water that did nothing to quell the trembling. A relic of Saint Leopold was even placed beneath his pillow in hopes of restoring his vitality, yet nothing changed. Ferdinand remained a child trapped within the crown of a man. He amassed toy soldiers, offered them crumbs from his own plate, and spent afternoons watching pigeons from the palace windows. He was captivated by clocks, often dismantling them during restless nights, crying when he could not reassemble their gears. Ministers learned to endure the charade, reading state reports to an emperor who nodded solemnly yet internalized none of it. His speech declined further. His words slurred, saliva collected at the corners of his mouth, prompting attendants to keep silk cloths readily available. In moments of anger, he would fervently repeat phrases like "do it, do it." Without context, foreign diplomats would return home describing audiences that felt like Seances encounters with a man physically alive but mentally absent. Ferdinand's decline escalated. The frequency and severity of his epileptic fits increased, often heralded by a strange metallic taste that brought terror, causing him to clutch his mouth in panic. After each episode, he would sleep for hours afterward, his breathing shallow and erratic. His left arm began to twitch incessantly, an early sign of irreversible neurological damage. Physicians wrote of a slight drooping in his right eyelid and facial asymmetry, potential remnants of minor strokes. The portrait painters of the imperial court, once skilled at idealization, were now reduced to creating images from imagination rather than from life. By his early 30s, Ferdinand's physique took on the contours of an old man. His hair thinned to mere wisps, his skin sagged, and his movements grew stiff and uncertain, requiring deliberate focus with each step. Digestive issues plagued him: chronic bloating, vomiting, and pain symptoms, likely a result of anticonvulsant tonics laden with heavy metals. Court doctors hastily experimented with mixtures of opium, arsenic, and foxglove tinctures, but none provided relief. During dinner, Maria Anna often cut his food into minuscule pieces, feeding him discreetly while servants pretended not to notice. Her affection for him was a blend of pity and duty. Their marriage, devoid of passion, devolved into an alliance steeped in resignation. In her private letters, she described Ferdinand as gentle as a child, a saintly figure suffering tremendously, yet lost to the world around him. Outside the palace, Europe hurtled toward revolution. Within its walls, Ferdinand's mind receded into ritual. He engaged in hours of prayer, confessing sins he could not name and writing the same lines of scripture repeatedly in a shaky scrawl. Meanwhile, ministers took on the responsibilities of state, maintaining the illusion that every decision stemmed from the emperor's will. In truth, the empire was governed by a council of caretakers. Visitors departing from Hofburg whispered conspiracies about the strange emperor. Some considered him holy, others labeled him bewitched. His courtiers affectionately called him Ferdinand the Good, not for his wisdom or mercy, but because he lacked the wits to be cruel. He smiled when addressed, wept when scolded, and expressed gratitude to every servant who wiped his chin. Yet beneath this polite facade lay the Habsburg bloodline, gradually withering in slow motion. Centuries of inbreeding had yielded a monarch who could neither sire heirs nor govern effectively, one who was barely able to exist. By 1840, Ferdinand's physicians began documenting symptoms they dared not publish: night terrors, loss of bladder control, and episodes of blank stares lasting hours. They spoke of these episodes as absences, now recognized as petit mal seizures. During these spells, his eyes would gloss over. Lost somewhere far from the present? Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to support our work. Never miss an upload. Like this vid, drop a comment, and share it with others to help us grow this historical community.